Hi, everybody. This is Professor Calabata, and this is the teacher response for the Comprehension Question Discussion Board for Module 3. A couple of interesting things I saw. Again, I thought you guys did a pretty good job at answering all the questions. And I thought that in particular, questions 2 and 3 elicited some interesting responses from you guys. So the first one, well, question number 2, what is implicit bias? I thought you guys understood that pretty well. In recent years, the concept of implicit bias has become a pretty popular topic to talk about, given all the political things going on in the world right now. And it also demonstrates a sort of more sophisticated understanding of prejudice and discrimination that our culture is experiencing right now. Let me see. Let's look at Brianna Sandoval. So yeah, you had a clear example right there. Implicit bias is when we associate certain stereotypes about people without even thinking about it. So yeah, the example you came up with, a study in Sweden found that venture capitalists described male entrepreneurs as young and promising and female entrepreneurs as young and inexperienced. And the interesting thing about that study is that it doesn't just demonstrate the attitude. First of all, a venture capitalist, I guess, okay, this is not a business economics class, so I don't expect you to know all these terms about what is a venture capitalist. But basically, there are people, sometimes younger people, who have an idea about how to start a company, but they don't have access to money. And then there are people that do have a lot of money and they want to invest the money in a company, hoping that the company will grow and give them more profit later on. So, a venture capitalist is just somebody who has some money to invest and they're looking for a great idea to invest their money into. Younger people who are entrepreneurs who want to start up a company, they need to make contact with venture capitalists. It just basically means coming in contact with somebody who has money, hoping that that person will invest in their idea. So this study in Sweden was looking at people who have money to invest and trying to see what their attitudes are about both female and male entrepreneurs who have ideas that they want to start a business and they're looking for investors. And so the study in Sweden showed that these investors have a positive opinion about male entrepreneurs, but they have a more negative perception of female entrepreneurs, seeing female entrepreneurs as young and inexperienced. Yeah. That study, as I was saying, that study didn't just demonstrate that that venture capitalists have a negative opinion of female business owners, but it also demonstrated that they had a negative opinion of female business owners and that they were not consciously aware. I guess maybe not always, sometimes they are, but that they were not consciously aware of their negative attitudes towards female business owners. And that's the interesting thing about implicit bias. That's what the word implicit means. And I got the impression you guys understood that pretty well. I don't know what major all of you are. If you have a psychology class or a sociology class, you might go into this in more detail. But the human brain is really fascinating in this respect. One of the really interesting things about the human brain is that most of the stuff going on inside the human brain is stuff that the human brain itself is not consciously aware of. And that's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. The human brain has consciousness, it is self-aware, and at the same time, it is not aware of a lot of the stuff that the brain itself is doing. And so, or even in a philosophy class, you might go into this. In philosophy, there are certain types of philosophy. There was a couple of famous philosophers that said things like, we are strangers to ourselves, that it takes time and energy for us to get to know ourselves. And it can be a disturbing and frightening experience to do that, to have a long, hard look at ourselves in the mirror to try to understand ourselves better. So, implicit bias is one of these symptoms of being a stranger to oneself. So again, it's important to remember that going forward. It doesn't mean that when somebody exhibits discriminatory behavior, hurtful behavior towards other people around them, implicit bias is not not necessarily an excuse. Oh, well, I had implicit bias and I didn't know what I was doing. So implicit bias doesn't mean that a person is not responsible for their actions. I think that one of the things to remember is that it's important to look at the impact that we're having on other people around us. And the scary thing to think about sometimes is that if we're having a negative impact on other people around us, it doesn't necessarily matter what our intention is. I mean, it does. Intent matters. It's not like it doesn't matter. If we do something to cause harm to other people on purpose, versus doing something that causes harm to people and we didn't intentionally mean to do that. I think it's important to say, it's fair to say that those two different behaviors are not the same thing. But still, if somebody's being harmed by what we're doing, the person who's being harmed doesn't necessarily care whether we intended to do it or not. So if we're looking at intent versus impact, it is important to put more importance on impact than intent. It's not an excuse after the fact to say, well, I didn't mean it. So, we do have a responsibility to do the work necessary to get to know ourselves better so that we don't cause harm to other people around us. So, but implicit bias is one of these fascinating things that, and a scary thing that the human brain does. We say and do lots of things without being consciously aware that we're doing it while we're doing it. The subconscious mind is a very big and very complicated thing. So, implicit bias is one of the symptoms of that. Question number 3. I did see some interesting responses to that one. That was another one. Let me see here. In fact, let me see. I was looking at Brianna Sandoval. I noticed from up here above. When I saw this question, I was amused and also gave it a disgusting face. Yeah, so I thought that a number of other people said something kind of similar. That question number 3, white privilege creates an environment of discrimination that is costly in many ways for people of color. However, what is the cost of white privilege for white people? I did see some people, express some uncomfortable feelings about that. Some people said, cost to white people. There is no cost to white people, and I think that's a logical response. If we're talking about white privilege, if we're talking about male privilege, there are certain groups of people in society who have special advantages. The culture, the cultural system, the political system, the economic system, all these different layers of systems that shape our lives, they give certain advantages to some people and they give disadvantages to other people. And I think we talked about that in one of our previous essays. The system is the way it is because people in the past made certain choices to build the systems that way. And it would have been nice if they had made different choices, but they didn't. They made the choices they did, and so this is the world we've inherited. And so, the systems that govern our lives they're filled with a lot of inequality. That system of privilege, I do think that I agree with a lot of the things that a lot of you were saying in the discussion board. In that it is a little bit of an uncomfortable question. What is the cost to white people of white privilege? Or if we're talking about male privilege, what is the cost to men of male privilege? Because, like, for instance, taking male privilege as an example, I would agree most of our discussion, when discussing something like male privilege in any class or outside of class, in life in general, in politics, in American culture, whatever, most of the discussion, taking male privilege as an example, most of the discussion should be on the negative impact that male privilege causes women. So what is this doing to women? How is it harming women? That is where most of the discussion should be. With white privilege, how does white privilege cause harm to people who are members of racial minority groups? That is where most of our discussion should be. Now, having said that, I also think it's important to talk about what the cost of privileged systems of privilege, what is the cost to the people who actually have the privileges, which I think it's a normal response for us to sort of scratch our heads and say, well, if you're a man and you have these advantages over women, how is that causing you any harm? But if you think about it, go back to question number 2, the implicit bias question. What is implicit bias? And implicit bias is something that is happening on a level in the human brain that is not conscious. So there's the conscious brain, and then there's the part of the brain where stuff is happening that we're not consciously aware of. And the interesting thing about the way the human brain works is that these two different parts of our brain, the stuff going on the conscious level and the stuff going on the level that is not conscious, those two different parts of the brain are often moving in two different directions. So we often say things and do things on the conscious level. We have a certain perception of ourselves and a perception of the world on the conscious level. But on the level of our brain that is not conscious, our brain is moving in the other direction. So, in other words, we have a perception of ourselves that we are a certain type of person on the conscious level. But then on the other level of our brain that is not conscious, we are often a very different type of person. So again, there's this recurring idea that we are strangers to ourselves. And maybe another way of looking at it is that we are not a single individual. This is another weird thing that you'll run into in like a philosophy class or a psychology class. We are not a single individual. It's more like we are multiple individuals existing inside the same mind. And these different, I guess you could almost say like different people. These different people are pushing and pulling our behavior in different directions. So where we are one type of person on the conscious level, and we're a different type of person on the level that is not conscious. And you remember, that's one of the things that we saw in that video about implicit bias. Implicit bias is on that level of the brain that is not conscious, and the stuff going on that level of the brain is running in the opposite direction of the things that we're thinking and feeling on the conscious level of our brain. So, on the conscious level of our brain, we might be thinking, oh, I'm not a racist person. I'm a good person. But on that deeper level of the brain, where it's not on the conscious level, we might be exhibiting, we might be thinking and feeling and exhibiting certain types of behavior that runs contrary to what we're thinking of ourselves on the conscious level. And it can be happening, not always, but it can be happening on a level that we're not consciously aware of. So again, what is the cost to the person who is in that system of privilege? The person who has the special advantages. The privileged system is giving them advantages. One of the consequences for a person that has special privileges is that they are less likely to be aware of what their own implicit bias is. And simply put, the reason is because the system of privilege is making it so that they don't have to face consequences for their actions. Lots of things that happen in life that cause us to go through personal growth are often uncomfortable experiences. Not always, but many times it is. Maybe we were doing something at work with our job and we didn't live up to expectations, or in some other part of our life we did something that was unethical, something that was wrong. And whatever, there's lots of examples in life where we do something and we have to face consequences for what we've done. That's just part of life. Everybody experiences that. And it's a very uncomfortable experience when we have to face consequences for our actions. But one of the positive things that comes from that is that when we face consequences for our actions, it usually causes some sort of personal growth. When we face negative consequences for our actions, it forces us to look in the mirror and to reevaluate our own sense of self. And it's those moments when we become more aware of the things going on inside of us that we are not consciously aware of. Remember, The mind is divided into conscious and not conscious stuff. And if we don't face consequences for the things that we do, then we will probably go through life remaining unaware of the types of things that are going on inside our brain that are on the level that is not conscious. So it's facing consequences that often, remember, we are multiple selves, we are multiple people existing inside the same mind. And these different personality traits are pushing and pulling us in different directions. And it's often the experience of having to face consequences that forces us to become more aware of and more in touch of these different parts of ourselves. So, simply put, when a person is in a position of privilege, one of the things that a system of privilege does for the person who has special advantages in that system of privilege, one of the things that system does is it protects that person from having to face consequences for their actions. And as a result, they are more likely to go through life being not in touch with themselves and not aware of their own ideas, their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own behavior patterns. And simply put, that inhibits personal growth. So let me see. Nicole Reyes. Yeah, you said a couple of interesting things. Number 3, what is the cost of white politics? You say, this question is the epidemic. Yeah, according to McIntosh, white American culture is damaged culture because white people cannot see beyond their experiences. White people are not trained to empathize with other groups of people. They must go out of their way to do so. Yeah, McIntosh legitimately had to sit down to face her white privilege. Self-reflection does not come easily to everybody, and even less so for an individual with unchecked privileges. So, yeah, okay. In fact, maybe I have to apologize. I just went on for a couple of minutes trying to describe what was going on in the human brain, and maybe, Nicole, you kind of did it nicely there in only 4 sentences. Maybe I just should have read your answer and then just been done with it. I'm sorry if the video went on longer than it should have. But anyways, yeah, there's a couple of things that Nicole pointed out here. This idea of not being able to see beyond their experiences. Self-reflection does not come easily to everybody. Self-reflection is scary, right? Looking in the mirror and reevaluating your own sense of self. How has privilege shaped who I am as a person? How does privilege shape who I think, what I think of myself, and how does privilege shape how I see the world? Looking in the mirror and having a long, hard look at oneself to reevaluate a person, to reevaluate your own sense of self, is an experience that can cause a lot of fear and anger. But if the person can get through that experience, on the other end of the experience, it results in some oftentimes really rather extraordinary personal growth. And so, it's those types of personal growth experiences that we want to try to experience in life. So, if you're a white person, if you're a man, if you're, a heterosexual, cisgender person, if you're a person who's a member of a group of people that has special advantages in the system, the cultural system, the economic system, whatever, going through this difficult process of reflection. Maybe I didn't ask to be a privileged person, but the fact is the system gave me special privileges, and how has that system shaped who I am as a person? That's going to be a very uncomfortable question to ask. But if the person can have the courage and the strength to do that, and it does take a lot of courage and sophistication to do that, becoming more in touch with oneself and then changing their own sense of self can result in some really rather extraordinary personal growth. And you can tell McIntosh, right? The person that wrote that article is a person who's made an effort to try to do that, right? As a white person, she's made an effort to try to do that. And it's because, remember she mentioned, because she's a woman and she sees male privilege. And so if she would hope that men would try to reflect on their own male privilege. And if she wants men to do that, then maybe, she wanted to try to do something that she expects other people around her to try to do, right? As a white person, she wants to try to reflect on that privilege that she has, hoping and expecting that other people around her will do the same thing. So it inhibits personal growth. I think that's one of the things that privilege does. White privilege, male privilege, whatever. All these different types of privilege. What it does is it inhibits a person's ability to grow as a human being. And one of the other consequences that Nicole mentions right here, let me see. White people are not trained to empathize, right? Empathy. Empathy is the ability to experience an emotion that someone else is experiencing. So if somebody else is scared, maybe I didn't experience the same thing that they're experiencing, but because I see they're scared, I feel scared for them. Or if somebody else experiences a horrible loss and they're sad, even if I didn't experience that loss, I feel sad for them. So that's what empathy is. Empathy is the ability to experience an emotion that somebody else is experiencing. And again, implicit bias that is a result of a system of privilege, it inhibits a person's ability to feel empathy for other human beings that are different than themselves. So like I said, question 3, I could see, a lot of people had a lot of interesting things to say about question 3. And it is a rather uncomfortable question to ask, like I said. How does male privilege, harm men? How does white privilege harm white people? I think it's a normal reaction for some people to say, "Wait, what?" If you're a woman and, you hear somebody say that, how does male privilege harm men? That's not the question we're supposed to be asking. How does it harm women? And I agree, that's true. When we're talking about systems of privilege, how does a system of privilege harm people? Most of our discussion should focus on how that system of privilege is harming the people who have disadvantages. That absolutely is where most of our discussion should be. But it's also important to spend at least some amount of time to ask the question, how is that system of privilege harming the people who actually have the privilege? And the fact is, it is harming them as well. Not in the same way that it harms people that have the disadvantages, but the big way that systems of privilege harm privileged people is that it inhibits their personal growth. It inhibits their ability to become more aware of their own sense of self, and it inhibits their ability to have empathy for other people who are different than themselves. So, a system of privilege will make it so a person is a less sophisticated person, right? That's what privilege does to a person who's a privileged person. It inhibits personal growth and emotional sophistication. Okay. So anyways, overall pretty good, guys. Those were some of the big things I noticed, and I know you'll do pretty well on Essay 3 from what I see.